Okay, hello everybody, and welcome back to Unsolicited Feedback, the show where we don't sugarcoat leadership and we definitely don't rely on hope to get results because let's be real, hope is not a business strategy. I'm back as your co-host. My name is Paul Kreiter, here to support the conversation, to keep the energy high and make sure you walk away with practical insights you can actually use. And I'd like to introduce you to your host with over 40 years of experience across the military, corporate America, and now as an entrepreneur at 1310 Business Solutions, Chuck Knabusch. He's the type to bring his real-world insight that cuts through the noise and gets things done. Right, Chuck?
Yeah. And let's not forget our co-host, the incredibly talented Paul Kreiter, a strategic storyteller or storytelling consultant and presentation coach with well over 25 years of experience. He helps leaders communicate with more clarity, more confidence, and impact on stage, on camera, kind of like this, and inside their companies. If you're joining us live, drop your questions and thoughts into the chat. We want this to kind of feel like a conversation. Would love to go ahead and be able to respond to thoughts and questions. And if you're catching the replay, you can always go ahead and reach out to me directly at chuck@1310. That's 13ten.com. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so here we are, part 3, and everyone should know what we're talking about right now, leader standard work, right, Chuck? Part 3 brings us into a category I think we've all been waiting to hear about, right? How do we actually make money and generate profits for our businesses? So what is this third part called, Chuck?
Well, quick review on the earlier parts. We've kind of talked about what we've seen in the green, the sales and production, the revenue. We've talked about the administrative costs, which you see in the orange. And today we're going to go ahead and move on up to that blue that you see on the screen, the innovation and marketing. It's where profits are generated. And this is kind of my overall concept for all of this. And we'll kind of get into, I know it's kind of small, it's kind of busy for some people, but it outlines that in the past we've talked about in that sales and production group, we've talked about performance management and execution, and how you should be spending about 20% of your time there. We talked about kind of the administration, kind of the cost part, where you should be spending maybe 10% of your time on administration, about 10% fighting fires and chaos, not really more than that, because if you are, it shows that you have some underlying issues that need to get fixed. And 15% on networking, on expanding, on collaborating, not just internal, but internal is important, both your internal customers as well as your internal suppliers, but also externally, your external customers, as well as, don't forget those external suppliers, because they're important also. So today, as I said, we're going to be talking about innovation and marketing. This is the area where profits generated. And you say, well, but Chuck, profit is generated from revenue, and you're not wrong. But the problem with that profit is that's burdened with all the overhead, all that administrative costs that we talked about in a previous episode. What I'm talking about is as we innovate, as we come up with something new and we put it in place, it really isn't burdened until the next fiscal year with all the overhead. I mean, yes, you're going to have overhead, but that overhead's already being absorbed by how you're generating current revenue. So what we're talking about here are things like innovation. What are we talking about? Well, it can be small things like incremental innovation. How do I go ahead and make this process a little bit more effective or a little bit more efficient? How do I drop some cost out? Or it can be the next big breakthrough. I mean, I know AI has been around for a lot of years, but we're starting to go ahead and see the implementation, the application of AI. I know I was talking to my daughter, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying that she doesn't really put out an email anymore without running it through AI, just to make sure it doesn't offend anybody. It doesn't go ahead and it meets all the basic guidelines and rules of her company. Neat thing to go ahead and do. because sometimes we're angry, we're sad, our emotions take over, and you can find that and read that in an email. So
Yeah.
by filtering it through like an AI would be a great way to make sure that that's not the message that's being sent, but the content really is.
Yeah. So I think everyone can absolutely agree that like the onslaught of all of these AI tools and products are certainly like it's innovation, and that seems like innovation with like a capital I. Can you talk about like lowercase I innovation so that for the people that are trying to get a handle on like their everyday business can see innovation not as hard to digest as like this whole new thing that we're dealing with?
Well, I mean, innovation, you're right. I mean, whether it's small, but uh, I come from the manufacturing background, as many of you know, and lean has a component of continuous improvement in it. How do we get better? How do we make it just a little bit better each and every day? And all those little incremental improvements over time really go ahead and pay back hugely. So, if you get some feedback from your customers and they're saying, well, I liked this, but it didn't have that, or, I like this, and could we also do this? I mean, those are the wonderful feedback tidbits, the seeds that you can go ahead and plant and say, how do we include that? How do we do that at no additional cost? Or how do we do that? And we might have to do a little bit of difference in pricing. It may be, you've got somebody out there doing administrative work for you who says that he or she, well, if we had a form that I could just go ahead and bounce through rather than having to type this free form, I could probably save 15 seconds or a minute on each one of these that I have to go ahead and fill out. Okay, so design a form. It might take you a half hour or an hour to do it, but how many of these forms, how much of this information are they inputting for you? So by creating that form for them, it's going to make it so much easier. They'll know exactly where the data is supposed to go. They'll be much faster. They'll be much more efficient. That particular one may not go ahead and mistake proof it, but then as you're creating that form, you could say, well, only a date goes in here and only in the date format, or only numbers go in this particular field. So we're not putting alphas in a numeric field. And it's little incremental things like that that can go ahead and lead to huge, huge efficiency gains and make you far more effective.
Yeah, that's really important, and I'm glad you said that because I know for a fact a lot of the people who tune in here are trying to figure out how to business, right? And I think there's a lot of gaslighting out there, which is like you got to do these big, huge things, right? These big, huge processes that have to be put in place. When that absolutely dismisses the minutia, right? Which we all poo-poo as being like, oh, this is boring. It's every day. But without this backbone, the bigger capital I innovation doesn't happen. And that's lost. I mean, it's lost on me every day with my business. As an entrepreneur, like I want to be the visionary, right? And I want to think about the future state always. And I am constantly reminded by people like you, and also in the posts from our audiences that show up here and what their worlds just remind you that there are several different levels that you have to pay attention to. It's not just what's going to happen later. It's what's happening now. And it's also what happened before you got to now, right? All that stuff matters.
Absolutely. And I think we talked previously, we mentioned how we ought to document processes. Well, when we go ahead and go back and we look to make those incremental changes, make sure you update that documentation. But I mean, for the solopreneur like you or like me, if we don't document those things that we do repetitively, and we decide it's time to scale, it's time to add, maybe we start with a virtual assistant simply because we don't have to hire a full-time person. How will they know what to do if we don't have something that we can go ahead and give them? in documentation. How can they say, well, let's go ahead and prove this? And this is exactly where I see, because they're bringing a whole nother perspective. We're not just paying them to go ahead and repetitively do things. We want them to go ahead and give it that other look, that other set of eyes, that other brain, and say, well, I think this could run so much smoother if you go ahead and do this. Well, if you've got that process documented, you can redocument. Okay, what's that going to go ahead and mean? How do we go ahead and redocument it to show this innovation? And now you've got something for that next generation.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether we go through versions 1 through 100 in the next 60 days or just 1 through 5. I mean, are we constantly is our mindset constantly to go ahead and be making things better?
Yeah. It's such an important reminder that it's not just the big picture. The smaller moments strung together create the strength, the foundation to make the next step towards your future state. Capital, and which then takes those lowercase I innovation and actually capitalizes them, because it's all part of the same process.
Absolutely.
So Chuck, like, where in your history, like in your experience, have you seen in your own work, corporate America, Lazy Boy, your thoughts? I know you love Disney and whatever. Like, can you point out like a moment where you're like, now that is prime innovation?
Well, I mean, if you want to go and start with Lazy Boy, I mean, the whole thing where they made a reclining chair where the seat kind of moved out as the back went down. I mean, that's their mechanism. I mean, that is something that dates back in some form or another all the way back to 1927, 1928. Absolutely. I mean, and some have said, not all, but that was kind of the birth of the recliner. I mean, we see it. You're right. Disney's a very innovative thing. I mean, some of the new rides that they've got coming out, they're not just to sit in it, but it's immersive. It's using screens. It's using electronics. It's in some cases it's using kind of like holograms, which is absolutely amazing. I was a fan of The Mandalorian as it was playing, and they have come up with a whole nother set where all the backgrounds are nothing but electronic screens. So they can go ahead and they don't have to necessarily go to a particular location. They can go ahead and put it up on the screen, and they can go from a very watery environment to a very desolate, dry, arid environment as fast as they can upload it onto the screen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got to blow the actors and actresses' minds
Yeah.
away. But on the other hand, it gives them the ability to do that without all the cost of going to every location. Now, I'm not saying that going to locations is bad, but from an economic standpoint, I don't want to see my ticket prices continue to rise. I'd love to go ahead and see they do some bigger and better and more flashy things and be able to go ahead and do it at an affordable cost to me.
Yeah. It's such a cool point. Yeah, it's like, I know you're a road trip guy, and you were just talking about that you were in Utah, and you're also getting ready for your Route 66 trip, which I'm so jealous about. But back to like the whole car analogy, it's like when you lift the hood up, like you realize that like on the outside is this, except for your old jalopy, of course, right? But like the cars that are like the sleek, the smooth, the stylish, and then you lift up the hood and you're like, wow, look at all these components, right? It looks good on the outside, but that is not what made this. I also like to sort of equate it to like the theater, right? So an audience shows up, they go to an auditorium, they have a seat, and you mentioned movies and theater, right? And there's a big, thick black curtain, right? And that's by design, because the people in the audience are not supposed to see what's happening up there. They see the final product, curtains open, and then the people take their stage and the music starts and the acting begins. If the curtain opened prior to the performance being ready, the audience would be disappointed because they see people out of place. They would see costumes without heads on. They would see sets not in the right place, and it ruins
the illusion.
Experience in the illusion. Absolutely.
So let's move on to our next point underneath this category, and that's development. Leaders need to develop. But what do they need to develop? Well, they need to develop themselves first and foremost, because if you're not learning something, if you're not expanding, if you're not, whether it's through somebody else's posts, podcasts, a book you read, a class you go to, you need to be developing yourself. You need to understand that today's day and age is not the same one that we had maybe even pre-COVID, just 5 years ago or so. So development is important for yourself as a leader, but you also need to be developing your people, your team, because teams members come and go. You have to go ahead and make sure that that new member feels welcome, that they get integrated in with the other team members. You need to be looking to see, do you have some team members who have some leadership ability? And if so, how are you going to go ahead and encourage that and help them light that leadership fire, help them get the training and the understanding as to what leaders should go ahead and be doing. A lot of times we see, especially from a plant floor, the best technical person doing this job is the one who gets promoted into that first line supervisor role. And what do? They don't know, because they haven't been trained. Now, a lot of times you'll see the training is, well, how to go ahead and speak to others, which absolutely critical, how to interact, how not to offend people, how to get your point across. All great topics, but it's not about what you ought to be doing. It's not about what do you do between that. And so what I end up seeing is things like vice presidents of operations, moving materials. I'm not against the moving materials, but it's the most expensive move that their organization is going to go ahead and make. What I want them to do is, after they move the materials, ask the question, well, why couldn't the materials movement team do this? What prevented them? Because that's the problem that we need to fix. That's the innovation that needs to go ahead and be looked at. And so while you are innovating on the one hand, you are also developing your people, your team, your future leaders, because at some point in time, you might want to move up, move on, move out, whatever. But you don't want to go ahead and see the organization crash. So you need to make sure you're developing the next generation.
It's another smart way of sort of recategorizing the idea of innovation. We think of not everyone will equate the two. Development is a right. subset of it, right? So it's very sleek, and it's very helpful. And again, it just reminds us that there are so many components, like there are so many things that lead towards capital I innovation.
And our third component, Paul, is planning. In this category of innovation and development is and the whole marketing is planning. We need to plan ahead. We can go ahead and talk in the microcosm. Every evening I kind of plan what my next day, I look at my calendar, what's on there. Well, what other tasks do I have and how can I go ahead and fit those in? What things can I delegate or get rid of? So we can do it on the micro as we do it day by day. We can go ahead and do it on the weekly. Sunday evening, I'm sitting in front of the TV, whether I like what's on or not, it's making noise. And I'll go ahead and kind of look at my week and say, what do I want to achieve for this week? And it gives me an opportunity to say, ooh, I see some conflicts out here or some potential conflicts. I need to either reach out and reschedule some things, or I need to go ahead and try and work through those before I get to that point in my schedule. But I'm also talking about kind of that macro planning. We need to kind of step back and say, what do we want to achieve for this quarter or this fiscal year? We need to go ahead and say, how are we going along in our plans? Are we hitting all the different points that we expect to? And if not, where can we go ahead and make adjustments? Because planning is all about having the time to step away from the actual firefighting, the actual operation, and think through what our different alternatives are and say, I think this is the best alternative for all of these reasons. But when life or business conditions gives you that left turn, you've thought through maybe not 100% of it, but you've thought through some of it. So you can say, I can now make the best decision as to what to do about this left turn. Going back to the road trip analogy, we'd be going down a road and we'd find there's road construction, roads closed. Well, what do you go ahead and do? Well, you take the detour. Well, what is that detour going to do? How's that going to affect your plan in time, in resources? Is it going to be so many miles out of the way that you now have to stop and get gas again? So a lot of different things. So planning is important, and then measuring your success against that plan, not to go ahead and belittle yourself if you're not achieving absolutely everything, but to go ahead and get that feedback to say, okay, well, next time I plan, I have to go ahead and put in a little bit more contingency, or I have to understand that things outside of my control happen. Great example of that was COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, did anybody have on their bingo card for the year to say when COVID was going to happen? No. Now, some companies were able to pivot very, very well. Some companies who couldn't pivot are no longer with us.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to use education as a great example. I mean, there were some colleges and universities that I had attended when I was trying to take classes in the military that were online way back in the 80s. But that was pretty much unheard of. Well, by 2020, there were still a lot of colleges and universities who didn't do that, but there were a few. Now, if those colleges and the universities who were doing e-learning, they were able to go ahead and just jack up the e-learning and tone down the in-person. But what about secondary schools? I mean, they probably looked to some of those colleges and universities and say, they can do it. If they can go ahead and do it on a collegiate level, why can't we do it on a secondary or elementary level?
Yeah.
Now, they didn't have the hardware. They didn't have, the servers to go ahead and do that. But, they could go ahead and learn. They could innovate. And it wasn't an innovation path that they had to go ahead and take all alone, because all of their peer companies were doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah. In my industry, the event planning, talent booking world, right? Live events. So when COVID came, it was a huge problem for that industry, and a lot of us did not make it. And we saw events turn to a virtual capacity with like virtual formats, with like these, like Sims avatar kinds of worlds where you would walk in, like cool on the surface, but also a little strange, right? Like, and there were some companies that made it work, and then there were some that no longer are with us, as you're saying. What a tall challenge, and what an interesting way of thinking of, again, like innovation is planning, because you would think of how is planning innovative, but here we are, right? It makes perfect sense. So we have innovation. Is there another component that we should be talking about as well?
Nope. There are only 3 components in this section, kind of the blue section that you see: the development, the innovation, and the planning. And I think they all intertwine. I mean, if you do one and you don't do another, you're selling yourself short. You won't get the full value out of it. So it's really important to go ahead and make sure that leaders at every level have a chance to go ahead and do this. I mean, I understand that first line supervisor on a production floor, they're not planning necessarily a year or 5 years down. We're not talking about capital forecast, but they should be able to go ahead and plan their day, their week, their shift, maybe a little further out, up to their month. But different, the CEO, if they're only looking at their day and their week, then they're probably, again, selling their company short, because they're not doing that capital planning or that capital forecast or that 5-year planning as to where do we think we can go ahead and be 5 years from now. And then making those milestones and seeing if we can't go ahead and hit them through benchmarking.
Right. Absolutely. So we have innovation and the 3 subcategories. Where does that bring us when it comes to leader standard work? Where do we go now?
Well, I mean, this is what people need to be looking at and saying, am I spending the time that I've suggested? Am I spending 15% of my time networking? Now, I'm not talking about 15% of the time every day, but on average. Things are going to go up, things are going to go down. We understand. Am I working on innovation? Am I consciously thinking about innovation 15% of my day or my week or my month, whatever time period? I understand some days it might be 0. Other days, if you're not putting the time, at least the 15% in, you'll never go ahead and average the 15%.
Right.
So it's really important. If we're not developing our people and ourselves and spending about 15% of our time, we're falling short. How do we expect to be able to take a vacation, step away? get sick and not show up one day if we're not developing somebody to go ahead and take our place. If we're not creating a plan as to what we're going to go ahead and do for the next day or for the next week, the next month, the next fiscal quarter. We have to go ahead and kind of have a plan, because remember, every one of us who are leaders also have, we have followers, and they're looking for that leadership. But don't forget that every one of us as leaders are also a follower of somebody else. So we're always hoping that they're giving us their plan. They're giving us insight into the bigger picture, maybe not all the details, but, and then we can go ahead and fit that into our planning. And then remember, the people below us in the food chain can go ahead and then create their plan. But it's not just above and below, but it's the people, the peers to the right or to the left. They need to understand what the plan is, because otherwise, from their perspective, you might be doing something really, really crazy, really, unheard of. So by having that networking time, by explaining to them, hey, this is what I think I'm going to be doing next week, and this is how it might impact your part of the operation, that gives them some insight that they can go ahead and react far better.
Yeah. Well, if for those who have been tuning in, either on these live LinkedIn lives or catching the replays, I think that what they've learned in parts 1, part 2, and part 3 of Leader Standard work is like there's a blueprint. There's a blueprint. There's a formula for as messy as things can get. There is a formula, and the closer you can be to following the formula, even if you slip up, which is part of the experience and accounted for, like you accounted for in the process. No one is perfect. No business is perfect. But for those out there wondering, like, what are the basic things I need to know and do and keep in mind, I think we've covered a pretty awesome universe of universal truths of these concepts. Capstone, comment, Chuck, about Leader Standard work, and where do you think we might go next in terms of unsolicited feedback?
Yeah, great question. I think leadership is a broad topic. There's a lot of other things we can go ahead and explore in there. Love to go ahead and maybe talk about planning. We can get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of that, or we can go ahead and even talk about execution. Because again, I think without leadership, without planning, without execution, you're guaranteed to go ahead and fail. And from an operational perspective, those 3 things are absolutely necessary to ensure your success. Yeah. So like from today's topic, the previous episodes, I certainly encourage people to go out to and use this QR code. It'll give you, just quick 1-2 page type recaps of all the episodes of Unsolicited Feedback, including part 1, part 2, part 3 of Leadership Standard work. It'll give you a way to contact me if you'd like to go ahead and just do a 30-minute conversation. There's a number of other what I call virtual tools in this toolkit. So, feel free to go ahead and scan the QR code, see what's out there, examine it, play with it a little bit, because it's all out there for you. We're doing this not because I want to see companies not have to make the same mistakes that maybe I did or that I've witnessed before. And it doesn't mean that you need $100,000. It doesn't mean that you need a department of people to go ahead and correct or prevent the problems. What you need is a mindset that says, I'm willing to, and spend the time and the effort on it.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I'll add that having a real down-to-earth conversation about it can demystify how enormously challenging these things seem to be at a big level. So I appreciate these very consistent conversations that we're having, and I'm sure that our audience does too, because when people can speak like human beings to each other and break it down and not get so convoluted or overwhelmed with all the things we have to do to run a business solo or with thousands of people under you, Unsolicited feedback has been actually more solicited than unsolicited because people need this and want it. So we appreciate you, Chuck, in a major way.
And sometimes what people need more than anything else is just another perspective, because you don't know what you don't know. You can't see your own blind spot. So
Right.
just by having a conversation with somebody and the ability to go ahead and say, this is what I see, this is what I expect, but I'm not sure that I'm seeing everything. Boy, that's something I wish I had when I was going through my 40 years. There weren't the number of mentors. And when I was offered a mentor, the mentor said kind of the same thing. What am I supposed to be doing here? Well,
Right.
Having been there, I know how to go ahead and provide the assistance, or at least give you that other perspective that you may or may not be getting otherwise.
Yeah, I can second that in a heartbeat. And I think, Chuck, that's a wrap on this episode of Unsolicited Feedback. And of course, a huge thank you to everyone who's joined us live. For those who are going to catch the replay, we see you. We know you're out there, and we appreciate you. Again, my name is Paul Kreiter of Kreiter Creatives, your co-host and storytelling strategist. It's always a blast supporting my colleague and friend, Chuck Knabusch.
Thanks, Paul. And remember, success doesn't happen through wishful thinking. It takes planning, leadership, and execution. The very things that we cover today and every day on Unsolicited Feedback. So don't just listen, put it to work. Try one of these this week. See what shifts. See the results that you get. If you want to go deeper, scan the QR code I provided earlier or book a 30-minute strategy session. Would love to hear how you're applying these tools in your business, because when you lead with purpose, you don't need to lean on hope.
And until next time, I'm Paul Kreiter.
And I'm Chuck Knabusch, signing off from Unsolicited Feedback. Let's get to work.